The sky above New York City turned black on a Tuesday morning in the year 2347. It was not clouds that blocked the sun, but ships. Thousands of them. They hung in the air like a nightmare made real, each one the size of a mountain. Their surfaces shimmering with strange energy that made the eyes hurt to look at. Admiral Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of the carrier, Durance. Orbiting high above the Earth, he had served in the fleet for 30 years, had fought pirates and protected colonies across the solar system. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission," his communications officer said, her voice shaking. The message was simple. A deep voice, translated into English by some unknown technology, spoke words that would haunt humanity forever. "You are now property of the Valdorian Empire. Resistance will result in extinction. Surrender your weapons and prepare for processing." Kyle looked at his crew. They were afraid. He was afraid too. But he was also the commander of Earth's orbital defense fleet, and he would not go quietly. "All ships, battle stations," he ordered, "target the nearest enemy vessel and fire everything we have." Missiles streaked through space toward the alien armada. Thousands of them, carrying enough explosive power to crack moons. They struck the lead Valdorian ship and exploded in brilliant flowers of fire. When the light cleared, the ship was untouched. Its shields had absorbed the attack without even flickering. Then the Valdorians fired back. Green beams of plasma cut through human ships like a knife through butter. The carrier Victory exploded. The destroyer Washington was sliced in half. In seconds, dozens of ships were gone, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. Kyle watched his fleet being destroyed. He watched friends he had known for decades vanish in balls of fire, and he understood with terrible clarity that humanity had no chance. "All ships retreat," he ordered. "Fall back to the moon. We need to regroup." Only 17 ships made it to the moon. The rest were destroyed or captured. The orbital defense was broken in less than an hour. On Earth, the ground invasion began immediately. Valdorian dropships descended on every major city. The soldiers that emerged from them were terrifying. They stood 8 feet tall, with gray-scaled skin and 4 arms, each one ending in clawed fingers. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Commander Lisa Grant was leading a Marine unit through the streets of Chicago when she saw her first Valdorian up close. The creature was executing civilians in a public square, using some kind of energy weapon that left nothing but ash behind. Lisa raised her rifle and fired. The bullets bounced off the Valdorian's personal shield like raindrops off glass. The creature turned toward her, its yellow eyes showing what might have been amusement. It raised its weapon. Lisa threw herself behind a burned car as the shot screamed past her head. Her squad opened fire, all of them targeting the same Valdorian. For a moment, its shield flickered. Then 3 more Valdorians emerged from a nearby building and cut down her entire unit in seconds. Lisa ran. She hated herself for it, but she ran. She ran through burning streets, past screaming people, over bodies of soldiers and civilians alike. She ran until her legs gave out. Then she crawled into a collapsed building and hid. The fighting lasted 72 hours. In that time, every military force on Earth was destroyed. Every government fell. Every city burned. The Valdorians were not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They were simply efficient. Resistance was eliminated. Resources were identified. Populations were sorted. A Valdorian officer named Executor Vraken was placed in charge of Earth's occupation. He was old by Valdorian standards, having overseen the conquest of 17 worlds before this one. Humanity was nothing special to him. Just another inferior species to be harvested. He addressed the surviving humans from the ruins of the United Nations building in New York. "Your species is now property of the Valdorian Empire," Vraken announced. His voice was calm, almost bored. "You will serve in our mines, our factories, and our breeding programs. Those who cooperate will be treated fairly. Those who resist will be made an example of. This is not a negotiation. This is your new reality. Lisa Grant was among the prisoners forced to watch this speech. She stood in a crowd of thousands, all of them wearing electronic collars that could kill with the press of a button. Around her, people wept. Some prayed. Others stared with empty eyes already broken. Lisa did none of these things. She watched Vraken speak, and she memorized every detail of his face. She looked at the Valdorian soldiers and studied how they moved, how they held their weapons, where the gaps in their armor might be. She was not broken. She was waiting. In the weeks that followed, the Valdorians began transporting humans off-world. Massive ships descended from orbit and swallowed entire cities' worth of people. They were taken to mining colonies, factory worlds, and places that Lisa did not want to imagine. Earth was stripped of its population like meat from a bone, but not everyone was captured. In the ruins of Denver, a small group of survivors found each other in an underground bunker that the Valdorians had overlooked. There were 37 of them. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, teachers, and ordinary people who had simply refused to give up. Among them was Dr. Nathan Cole, a physicist who had been developing experimental propulsion systems before the invasion. His lab had been destroyed, but his knowledge remained. And beside him sat a woman who had crawled through hell to reach this place. Lisa Grant looked at the faces around her. They were dirty, exhausted, and afraid. But they were alive. And as long as they were alive, there was hope. "They think they have beaten us," Lisa said, her voice steady, despite everything she had witnessed. "They think we are animals to be herded and slaughtered." "They are wrong," Nathan nodded slowly. "I've been working on something, a way to bypass their shields. It is not finished, but given time." "Time is all we have now," Lisa replied. "We hide. We learn. We grow stronger. And when the moment comes, we make them pay for every single life they have taken." The others looked at her, some with doubt, some with fear. But a few looked at her with something else, something that the Valdorians had never seen in a conquered species: hope outside. The alien ships continued their harvest, unaware that in the darkness beneath their feet, humanity was already beginning to fight back. The ember of resistance had been lit. It would take decades to become a fire. But it would burn, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same. 40 years had passed since the fall of Earth. The Valdorian Empire continued to rule the galaxy with an iron fist. Confident that no species could challenge their power, Emperor Kithros, the Eternal, sat upon his golden throne on the capital world of Valdoria Prime. Surrounded by servants and generals who told him only what he wanted to hear, he did not know that his empire was already dying. Lisa Grant was now 63 years old. Her hair had turned gray and her face was lined with decades of struggle. But her eyes remained sharp, and her mind was sharper still. She had spent 40 years building something that the Valdorians thought was impossible. A resistance movement that spanned the entire empire. They called themselves the Remnant. In a hidden base carved into an asteroid on the edge of Valdorian space, Lisa met with her inner council. The room was small and plain, lit by flickering lights that they could not afford to replace. But the people gathered here represented millions of humans scattered across hundreds of worlds. "We have assets on 17 Valdorian core worlds," Sandra Porter reported. She was the Remnant's intelligence chief, a woman who had spent 20 years pretending to be a loyal slave while secretly building a network of spies. "Our people are in their factories, their shipyards, their communication centers. They are waiting for our signal," Lisa nodded. "In the fleet?" Captain Maria Walsh stepped forward. She was 32 years old, born on a mining station to a mother who had been captured during the invasion. Maria had never seen Earth, had never breathed free air or walked under an open sky. But she carried the same fire that burned in Lisa's heart. "We have 212 ships," Maria said. "Most are stolen Valdorian vessels that we have modified with our own technology. They are hidden in nebulas and dead systems across the sector. The crews are trained and ready." Lisa turned to the last member of the council. Marcus Cole was the son of Nathan, who had died 10 years earlier. He had his father's brilliant mind and his mother's stubborn determination. At 35, he was the architect of every weapon the Remnant possessed. Tell them about the shields, Lisa said. Marcus activated a holographic display. Complex diagrams filled the air, showing the structure of Valdorian shield technology. The Valdorians have used the same basic shield design for 3,000 years, Marcus explained. They never needed to improve it because no one ever came close to breaking through. But I found a weakness, a specific frequency that causes the shield matrix to collapse. We can punch through their defenses like they are made of paper. The council members exchanged glances. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, the one piece of technology that could level the playing field. How long until we can mass-produce this? Sandra asked. The devices are already being built on 12 different worlds, Marcus replied. We should have enough for the entire fleet within 2 years. Lisa stood up and walked to a small window that looked out into the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, stripped bare, but not forgotten. Somewhere out there were billions of humans still living in chains. The Valdorians are planning a major offensive against the Kathrani collective, she said. They will commit most of their fleet to the campaign. That will leave their core worlds vulnerable. Maria frowned. The Kathrani had been fighting them for decades. What makes this offensive different? Emperor Kithros is getting old. He wants to secure his legacy before he dies. He is going to throw everything he has at the Kathrani to force a final victory. Lisa turned back to face the council. That offensive is our opportunity. When their fleet is committed, we strike. The plan took shape over the following months. Sandra's spies mapped every weakness in the Empire's defenses. Marcus refined his shield-breaking technology and trained engineers to install it on their ships. Maria drilled her captains until they could fly blind through an asteroid field, and Lisa waited. She had learned patience during 40 years of survival. She had watched friends die, had buried loved ones in unmarked graves on alien worlds, had pretended to be a broken slave while secretly building an army. She could wait a little longer. The years passed. The Valdorian offensive against the Kathrani began, and it was as massive as predicted. 2/3 of the Imperial fleet disappeared into the war zone, leaving the core worlds defended by skeleton crews and overconfident officers. On the eve of their attack, Lisa recorded a message. She sat alone in her quarters, facing a simple camera, and spoke directly to the beings who had destroyed her world. To the Valdorian Empire, 43 years ago, you came to Earth. You murdered billions of innocent people. You enslaved those who survived. You believed that you had broken us forever. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath the words. You were wrong. We are humanity. We do not forget. We do not forgive, and we are coming for you. The message was transmitted simultaneously to every system in the Empire. On Valdoria Prime, Emperor Kithros watched it with a mixture of confusion and anger. How could slaves send a message across his entire empire? How could they have the technology? His advisors assured him it was a bluff. The humans had no ships, no weapons. Nothing that could threaten the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. They were still telling him this. When the first reports came in, a shipyard had been attacked, then another, then a dozen more. Human ships were appearing from nowhere, their weapons slicing through Valdorian shields like they did not exist. For the first time in his 3-century reign, Emperor Kithros felt something he had never experienced before: fear in the command center of the Remnant. Lisa Grant watched the reports flooding in. Shipyards burning. Supply lines cut. Slave populations rising up on 100 worlds. The plan was working better than she had dared to hope. Maria stood beside her, eyes fixed on the tactical display. Executor Vraken is mobilizing a response fleet. He is coming for us personally, Lisa smiled grimly. Vraken, the one who had overseen Earth's conquest. The one who had called humanity property. She had been waiting 40 years to meet him again. Good, she said. Let him come. We have something special planned for him. The shadow years were over. The Remnant was stepping into the light. And the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity stopped hiding and started fighting back. The attack did not begin with a single battle. It began with 1,000 small actions happening at the same moment across the entire Valdorian Empire. On the industrial world of Valdoria Minor, human slaves who had worked in the power plants for decades pressed hidden switches. The entire planet went dark. Emergency systems failed. Communication networks crashed. In the confusion, slaves broke out of their holding facilities and disappeared into the countryside. On the moon of Kithrak, factory workers seized control of weapons manufacturing plants. Machines that had been building Valdorian weapons for 40 years suddenly started producing human designs, armed with their own creations. The workers defended their new territory against Valdorian security forces. On 17 different worlds, the supply depots exploded. On 12 more communication satellites were destroyed. On 5 prison planets, guards suddenly found themselves locked in their own cells, while prisoners walked free. The Valdorians had never faced anything like this. Every conquered species had accepted their fate eventually. Every resistance had faded within a generation. They did not understand that humans were different. They did not understand that humans had spent 40 years preparing for this exact moment. Admiral Gregory Stone led the main attack on the shipyards at Nexer Station. He was 61 years old, born into slavery on a mining colony, risen through the ranks of the remnant through skill and determination. His flagship was a modified Valdorian destroyer that the humans had captured and renamed the Reckoning 150. Ships dropped out of faster than light. Travel at the edge of the station's defense zone. The Valdorian commander responded with amusement. His station had 300 defensive turrets and shields that could withstand anything. Human vessels, you are ordered to surrender, the Valdorian broadcast. Your weapons cannot harm us. Submit now, and you will be returned to your proper place. Gregory did not bother to respond. He simply gave the order to fire. Green beams lanced out from the human fleet, each one carrying Marcus's Cole's shield-breaking frequency. The Valdorian shields flickered and collapsed. For the first time in 3,000 years, their defenses failed them. The defensive turrets exploded one by one. Warships docked at the station tried to launch, but they were cut down before they could power up their engines. The station itself, the largest shipyard in the Empire, broke apart under concentrated fire. Gregory watched without expression. He had been whipped by Valdorian overseers. He had watched his mother die in a mining accident that the Valdorians could have prevented but did not bother to. He felt no joy in this destruction, only grim satisfaction. "Sir, we have incoming transmissions from slave populations across the sector," his communications officer reported. "They are seeing our attack. They are rising up."
Tell them.
"We are coming," Gregory replied. "Tell them to hold on just a little longer." News of the attack spread through the Empire like wildfire. Emperor Kithros demanded answers that his advisors could not give. How had the humans developed such weapons? How had they organized such a coordinated strike? How had they kept their plans secret for so long? Executor Vraken volunteered to crush the rebellion personally. He gathered every available ship and set course for the Terminus Nebula. Where intelligence suggested the human command center was hidden, Maria Walsh was waiting for him, her fleet of 80 ships was outnumbered almost 3-1, but she had advantages that Vraken could not understand. Her crews had trained for this battle for years. They knew every trick, every tactic, every weakness of Valdorian combat doctrine, and they had Marcus Cole's shield-breaking technology. The battle began at dawn on a dead moon at the edge of the nebula. Vraken's fleet advanced in the traditional Valdorian formation. Confident that their superior numbers would win the day, Maria's ships scattered like leaves in the wind, then reformed in attack patterns that the Valdorians had never seen. They struck from unexpected angles, targeted weak points in the enemy formation, and disappeared before the Valdorians could respond. "They fight like insects," Vraken growled from his command chair, "swarming and biting. It is annoying, but it cannot win them the battle." But as the hours passed, his confidence began to fade. His shields kept failing at critical moments. His ships kept losing engines or weapons at exactly the wrong time. The humans seemed to know exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. After 2 days of fighting, Fraken had lost half his fleet. His flagship's shields were down, its weapons systems damaged, its engines failing. He ordered a retreat, but Maria's ships blocked his escape routes. On the third day, human boarding parties stormed his flagship. Maria led the assault personally. She moved through the corridors of the Valdorian ship with cold efficiency, her rifle cutting down every defender who stood in her way. Behind her came soldiers who had trained for years for this moment. They found Vraken on the bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. The Executor, who had conquered Earth, who had enslaved billions, who had called humanity property, stood alone among the ruins of his command. "You," he said, recognizing the fire in Maria's eyes. "You are the daughter of a slave I once owned." "My mother was Lisa Grant's friend," Maria replied. "She died in one of your labor camps when I was 12. She made me promise to live long enough to see this day." Rakan straightened to his full height, towering over the human woman. "Kill me then. It will not save your species. The Empire will crush you eventually." Maria looked at the being who had caused so much suffering. She thought about her mother, about all the humans who had died in chains, about the world she had never seen because this creature had helped to destroy it. "You do not deserve a quick death," she said, "but I will give you one anyway, because we are not like you." She raised her weapon and fired once. The Executor, who had been the symbol of Valdorian power over humanity, died without ceremony, without final words, without anything but a flash of light and silence. Maria stood over the body for a long moment. Then she turned to her soldiers, signaled the fleet. "Tell them the Executor is dead. Tell them humanity's coming home." Across the Empire, the news spread. The unconquerable Valdorians had been defeated. Their greatest commander had been killed by a human born in slavery. Species that had surrendered generations ago began to whisper about resistance. Slave populations that had accepted their fate began to dream of freedom. In the command center of the remnant, Lisa Grant received Maria's report. She was tired, her body failing after decades of stress and struggle, but she smiled as she read the message. The first strike had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. The Empire was shaking, and humanity was just getting started. The outer territories fell faster than anyone expected. World after world declared independence, or surrendered to remnant forces. The Valdorian fleet, still fighting the Kathrani on one front, and now facing humanity on another, could not be everywhere at once. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Empire was losing ground. Lisa Grant did not live to see the final victory, 6 months before the siege of Valdoria Prime began. Her heart gave out during a strategy meeting. The doctors said it was years of stress, years of poor nutrition and hiding, years of carrying the weight of billions of lives on her shoulders. She was 64 years old, and she had given everything she had. Her last words were simple. She looked at Maria, at the young woman she had mentored for 20 years, and said, "Finish what we started," and she closed her eyes and was gone. Maria stood over the body of the woman who had kept humanity's hope alive for 4 decades. She did not cry. There would be time for grief later. Right now, there was a war to win. She assumed command of all human forces. The council supported her unanimously. Everyone knew that Lisa had chosen her successor long ago. The siege of Valdoria Prime began in the spring of what would have been 2391 on the old Earth calendar. 300 Valdorian warships formed a defensive sphere around their homeworld. Orbital defense platforms, bristling with weapons, created a shell that should have been impossible to penetrate. Emperor Kithros had gathered what remained of his loyal forces for a final stand. He broadcast a message to the galaxy, promising that the Empire would never fall, that humanity would be crushed like every other species that had dared to challenge Valdorian supremacy. Maria did not bother to respond. Actions would speak louder than words. Admiral Gregory Stone led the first assault. His fleet of 200 ships engaged the Valdorian defenders in a battle that lasted 3 days. The fighting was brutal. Ships on both sides were destroyed. Thousands died in the cold vacuum of space, but the humans had advantages that the Valdorians could not match. Their crews were fighting for freedom, for revenge, for the chance to see their children grow up without chains. The Valdorians were fighting to preserve a system that had grown soft and corrupt over centuries of easy victory. The orbital platforms fell one by one. The defensive fleet was pushed back, then back again. After 3 months, human forces controlled the space around Valdoria Prime. Ground invasion began immediately. Colonel Daniel Hughes commanded the landing forces. He was 38 years old, a third-generation member of the Remnant who had never known anything but war. His soldiers were the best humanity had to offer, trained on captured worlds and hardened by years of guerrilla fighting. They landed on the night side of the planet. Far from the capital city, the Valdorians expected an assault on their seat of government. Instead, Daniel's forces struck at power stations, communication centers, and transportation hubs. Within a week, the planet was in chaos. Valdorian military units could not coordinate. Reinforcements could not reach where they were needed. The defenders, accustomed to fighting on other species' worlds, found themselves struggling on their own soil. The fighting was house to house, street to street. Valdorian cities were built for beings twice human size, which made them difficult to navigate but also provided excellent cover. Human soldiers learned to use the terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes in oversized doorways and using the tall ceilings to create unexpected firing positions. Marcus Cole led a special team to capture the planetary shield generators. These massive installations protected key government buildings from orbital bombardment. Without them, the human fleet could provide direct support to ground forces. The mission was supposed to be quick and surgical. It was neither. Valdorian defenders fought with desperate courage. This was their homeworld, the birthplace of their species, and they would not give it up without a fight. Marcus and his team were pinned down in a maintenance corridor, taking fire from 3 directions. "We need to reach that control room," Marcus shouted over the sound of plasma bolts. "If we do not disable those shields, the fleet cannot support the main assault." He looked at his team. Half of them were wounded. They were running low on ammunition. The Valdorians were closing in. Marcus made a decision. He grabbed the remaining explosives and sprinted for the control room. Plasma fire struck him twice, once in the leg, once in the chest. He kept running. Pain was just a signal, and he had learned to ignore signals long ago. He reached the control room and slammed his hand on the door release. Inside, Valdorian technicians scrambled for weapons. Marcus shot them without hesitation, then staggered to the main console. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurring. But he had watched his father die for this cause, had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. He would not fail now. He entered the shutdown sequence, planted the explosives as a backup, and triggered the detonation. The shields went down. High above, Admiral Gregory Stone saw the opportunity and ordered a full bombardment of Valdorian military positions. The tide of the ground battle turned in an instant. Marcus Cole died in that control room, a smile on his face. His team found his body surrounded by dead Valdorians. His mission complete. The final assault on the Imperial Palace took 2 more months. Emperor Kithros had fortified the building with every defense he could muster. His personal guards fought like demons, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had known. Maria Walsh led the team that breached the throne room doors. She walked through the shattered entrance, flanked by soldiers who had fought across the galaxy to reach this moment. The throne room was massive, built to impress and intimidate. Statues of past emperors lined the walls. Golden banners hung from a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. And there, on his throne, sat Emperor Kithros, the Eternal. He was old, even by Valdorian standards. His scales had faded to pale gray, and his 4 arms hung limply at his sides. But his eyes still burned with defiance. "So," he said, his voice echoing in the empty chamber, "the slaves have come for their masters." Maria approached the throne slowly. She was covered in dust and blood, her armor scarred by plasma burns, her rifle held ready. But she did not fire. "You killed billions of my people," she said. "You destroyed our world. You enslaved those who survived. That is what empires do, Kithros replied. We take, we rule. It is the natural order. Maria looked at the ancient emperor for a long moment. Not anymore. She turned to Daniel Hughes, who stood nearby with a pair of electronic restraints. Take him alive. He will stand trial for his crimes. Every species he ever wronged will have a voice in his judgment. Kithros laughed, a dry, rattling sound. You could kill me here and be done with it. Why bother with trials? Maria met his eyes. Because we are better than you. We always were. You just could not see it. The emperor of the Valdorian Empire was led away in chains. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. Human soldiers moved through the streets, helping wounded civilians of both species, securing prisoners, beginning the long work of rebuilding. Maria stood alone in the throne room for a moment. She thought of Lisa Grant, who had started this journey 40 years ago. She thought of her mother, who had died believing this day would never come. She thought of Marcus Cole, who had given his life to make it possible. They had won. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that had conquered the galaxy, humanity had won. Now came the harder part. Now they had to figure out what to do with victory. The years after the war were harder than anyone expected. Victory was simple compared to peace. Winning a battle required courage and weapons. Building a new galaxy required patience, wisdom, and something that humanity had nearly forgotten after decades of fighting it required. Forgiveness. Maria Walsh became the first leader of the Human Coalition, a government that united the scattered remnants of humanity across the stars. There were over 4 billion humans alive in the galaxy, spread across hundreds of worlds, and they looked to her for guidance. Her first act was not one of revenge, but of return. Ships were sent to Earth, which the Valdorians had stripped bare but never destroyed. What they found was a wounded world. The oceans were polluted, the forests burned, the cities collapsed into rust and rubble. But life still clung to the surface. Grass grew through cracks in the concrete. Birds nested in the ruins of skyscrapers. The planet was hurt, but it was not dead. Colonists volunteered to return. They were the children and grandchildren of those who had been taken. People who had never seen their ancestral home, but felt its pull in their blood. They landed on scarred soil and began the slow work of healing. Domes were built over the ruins of great cities. Machines worked day and night to clean the water and filter the air. Trees were planted. Animals were reintroduced. It would take centuries to fully restore what had been lost. But the process had begun. The first child born on the restored Earth was a girl. Her parents named her Hope. That name spread across the galaxy as a symbol of everything humanity had fought for. Emperor Kithros faced justice, but not the kind he expected. A galactic tribunal was established. With representatives from every species the Valdorians had wronged. For 6 months, witnesses came forward. They told stories of murdered families, of slave camps, of children taken from their parents and never seen again. The evidence was overwhelming. Kithros was found guilty on billions of counts of murder, enslavement, and crimes against sentient life. Many called for his execution. Many more demanded that his entire species be punished for what they had done. Maria Walsh argued against both. We did not fight this war to become what we destroyed, she told the tribunal. If we execute prisoners, if we enslave those who enslaved us, if we answer atrocity with atrocity, then we have lost even in victory. The tribunal sentenced Kithros to life imprisonment, with a special condition. He would be taken to every world his empire had damaged, forced to witness the reconstruction, forced to see the species he had dismissed as inferior building, something better than his empire had ever achieved. It was a fate worse than death for a creature who had believed himself superior to all other life. He died 7 years later, broken and forgotten, on a world where children of 3 different species played together in streets that had once run with blood. Valdoria Prime was not destroyed. It was not even conquered in the traditional sense. Instead, it became a shared world, governed by a council that included humans, Kethrani, reformed Valdorians, and representatives of dozens of other species. It was an experiment in cooperation that many believed would fail. It did not fail. It was messy, difficult, and filled with conflicts that sometimes threatened to boil over into violence. But it held. Year by year, the wounds began to heal. Children grew up together, played together, learned together. They did not carry the hatreds of their parents. Daniel Hughes. The colonel who had led the ground assault on Valdoria Prime retired from the military and became a diplomat. He spent the next 40 years negotiating treaties, resolving disputes, and slowly building the framework for a galactic community based on something other than conquest. "We cannot force peace," he explained to younger officers who questioned his patience with former enemies. "We can only create conditions where peace becomes more attractive than war. That takes time. It takes trust. And yes, it takes forgiveness. I know that is hard. I know some wounds never fully heal, but we have to try." Admiral Gregory Stone lived to be 112 years old. He spent his final decades teaching at a military academy that trained officers from a dozen different species. His students learned tactics and strategy, but they also learned something more important. They learned the true cost of war. "Every battle you win means someone loses," he told each graduating class. "Every enemy you kill had a family, a story, a life that ended because of your actions. Never forget that. Never take pride in destruction. Take pride in protection. Take pride in the peace you build, not the wars you fight." Not everyone agreed with the path Maria had chosen. There were humans who wanted revenge, who saw mercy as weakness, who believed the only way to be safe was to become conquerors themselves. Some of them formed violent movements that had to be suppressed. Others simply refused to participate in the new order. But the majority followed Maria's vision. They built, they healed, they reached out hands of friendship to species that had once been enemies. It was slow, difficult work, but it was good work. Maria Walsh retired from leadership at the age of 70. She returned to Earth, to the city that had risen from the ruins of Denver, where the remnant had first been born. She built a small house overlooking a valley that had once been scarred by war, but now bloomed with wildflowers. She died peacefully at the age of 93, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were a question. Did we do enough? Her daughter held her hand and whispered, "You did everything. Rest now." On the 100th anniversary of Earth's liberation, a monument was unveiled in Denver. It was a simple stone pillar, carved with thousands of names. The names of those who had died in the invasion, the names of those who had built the remnant, the names of those who had fought and fallen in the long war. There were too many names to read in a single lifetime. At the base of the monument, a simple inscription read, "They tried to break us. They only made us stronger. We remember those who fell so that we could rise. Their sacrifice echoes through eternity." Admiral Gregory Stone, now an old man with white hair and tired eyes, was the only surviving member of the original Remnant Council. He placed his hand on the cold stone and closed his eyes. He remembered Lisa Grant, who had refused to accept defeat when their world fell. He remembered Marcus Cole, who had given his life to bring down the shields of Valdoria Prime. He remembered all the faces, all the voices, all the dreams that had been sacrificed to reach this moment. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." Sun set over a world reborn. Its light painted the clouds in shades of gold and crimson, same colors that had filled the sky on the day the Valdorians first arrived. But now, there were no alien ships blocking the sun. Now, there was only peace. Children ran laughing through the streets of a city that had been rebuilt from rubble. Families gathered for dinner in homes that stood where battlefields had once been. Somewhere, a musician played a song that had been passed down through 4 generations, a song of hope and survival. Humanity had not merely survived, it had triumphed. It had shown the galaxy that even the smallest species, even the most conquered people could rise up and change everything, and in doing so, they had proven something that the Valdorians had never understood. True strength was not about domination. It was not about conquest or fear or power. True strength was about building something better from the ashes of something terrible. It was about choosing mercy when vengeance was easy. It was about extending a hand to those who had once been enemies. The empire that had shaken the galaxy to its core was gone. In its place, Something new was rising. Something human, and the stars had never looked brighter.